Independence was supposed to feel like freedom. Instead, it looks like panic in a parked car at midnight. I keep seeing the same images. A woman crying because her child is sick and there is no one else to help. Another breaking down over groceries she cannot afford. Another frozen by a leaking apartment she does not know how to fix. These are not rare moments. They are everywhere now. And they all point to the same uncomfortable truth. Real life does not care about your self-image, your feelings, or your fantasies about doing everything alone. I am not talking about extreme hardship. I am talking about normal adult pressure, bills, sick kids, broken cars, long days that do not stop just because you are exhausted. For many modern women, these ordinary responsibilities trigger collapse. Not because they are impossible, but because no one prepared them for the weight of carrying everything without structure, without support, without accountability. This is not a story about cruelty. It is a story about consequences. And once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. If these conversations matter to you, subscribe quietly and stay. The collapse never starts with chaos. It starts with a decision that feels reasonable in the moment. I have watched the pattern repeat itself too many times to ignore it. A woman leaves a stable situation believing life will finally open up. She tells herself she is choosing happiness. She says she feels trapped, unfulfilled, unseen. The relationship is not abusive. The man is not cruel. He works. He shows up. He is predictable. And that predictability becomes the problem. It feels dull. It feels limiting. It feels like life is happening somewhere else. So she convinces herself that independence will fix it. Sometimes it begins with divorce, a decent man, a steady income, a father who is present. She walks away because she is not happy or because she needs to find herself. Sometimes it happens earlier. She avoids commitment altogether. She chooses men who are exciting, emotionally intense, but unstable. Men who make her feel alive, but never make plans. Men who disappear when responsibility shows up. She tells herself she does not need a man. She tells herself she is strong enough to handle everything alone. Other times it is not about men at all. It is about lifestyle. She chooses the party years over, building something boring and durable. She delays discipline. She delays structure. She delays responsibility. She believes there will always be time later to get serious, later to settle down, later to grow up. At the beginning, it feels like relief. No compromises. No one questioning her choices. No one expecting consistency. She feels powerful making decisions without consulting anyone. She calls it freedom. She posts about it. She encourages other women to do the same. Leave. Choose yourself. You deserve more. What never gets discussed is what replaces the structure she walked away from. When there was a partner, life had weight distribution. Even when things were hard, the load was shared. One person handled the car. One person handled the bills. One person took over when the other was exhausted. Problems still existed, but they were absorbed by a system. Remove the system, and the same problems suddenly feel unbearable. At first, she does not notice. The early phase is quiet. Bills are still paid. The car still runs. The kids still have routines left over from when two adults were enforcing them. She tells herself she made the right choice. She feels validated. Then small cracks appear. A tire warning light comes on. A child gets sick. Rent goes up. Childcare becomes complicated. Work expects more hours. Nothing catastrophic. Just life doing what life always does. But now there is no buffer. No second adult to absorb impact. Every issue lands directly on her nervous system. This is where the illusion starts to break. I notice how often the shock comes from things that used to be invisible. Tasks she never thought about because someone else quietly handled them. Scheduling repairs, dealing with mechanics, navigating landlords, enforcing bedtime when children resist, making decisions when emotionally drained. These were never dramatic before. They were background processes. Now they are front and center, demanding attention when she has none left to give. She starts saying she is overwhelmed. She starts saying nobody warned her it would be this hard. She starts posting about exhaustion, about stress, about how unfair life feels. The tone shifts. Independence no longer sounds empowering. It sounds heavy. This is not because adult life suddenly became more difficult. It is because the cost of independence is finally being paid. The world does not care that she wanted freedom. The grocery store does not care that she is tired. The landlord does not care that she is emotionally burnt out. Her child does not care that she needs a break. Life keeps asking the same things it always asks. Show up, handle it, do what needs to be done. When there was structure, these demands were manageable. Without it, they pile up fast. What strikes me most is how often the woman genuinely believed things would be easier alone. That belief did not come from nowhere. She was told that dependence is weakness, that needing help is failure, that strong women do not rely on anyone, that happiness comes from removing constraints, not accepting them. So when the constraints disappear and reality gets harder, the confusion is intense. She thought independence meant less pressure. Instead, it means total pressure. There's no one to hand things off to, no one to tag out when emotions are raw, no one to say, "I've got this." Independence means you are always on duty, sick or healthy, calm or breaking, motivated or empty. The responsibility does not pause. This is the moment where many women realize they did not leave a cage. They left a support system, and this realization is destabilizing because it forces a confrontation with choice. Admitting that independence has a cost means admitting that past decisions had consequences. That is uncomfortable. So instead of processing that internally, many turn outward. They narrate the struggle. They seek validation. They frame the experience as oppression rather than outcome. I do not say this with malice. I say it because I have watched the emotional transition closely. The initial confidence, the growing strain, the eventual panic. It is not random. It follows a clear progression. The fantasy breaks slowly, then all at once. By the time she is openly collapsing, the foundation has already been gone for a while. The tragedy is that none of this required catastrophe. No dramatic betrayal. No sudden disaster. Just the steady pressure of adult life applied to someone carrying it alone, without preparation, without discipline, without realistic expectations. This is where the story truly begins. Not with cruelty, not with hatred, but with a misunderstanding about what freedom actually costs. I did not understand how deep this pattern ran until I watched it happen to someone I knew well. She was not reckless. She was not irresponsible. She was not abused. She had a husband who worked steadily, paid the bills on time, and showed up for his kids. He was involved, predictable, calm. The kind of man people only appreciate after he's gone. But she felt restless. She said she felt trapped. She said she had lost herself. She said she needed space to breathe and figure out who she really was. So she left. At first, she looked lighter. She smiled more in photos. She talked about growth and freedom. She posted about new beginnings. People applauded her courage. They told her she was strong for choosing herself. No one asked what she was leaving behind in practical terms. No one asked who would absorb the weight when life pressed back. 6 months later, the tone changed. It started with small things. Her car made a noise she did not recognize. She ignored it because she did not know what to do. Then it broke down at the worst possible time. She posted about how stressful it was, about how unfair it felt to deal with car trouble alone. She had never handled repairs before. She did not know who to call. She did not know how much it should cost. What used to be a phone call became a crisis. Then her child got sick. It was late, around 2 in the morning, fever high enough to scare her. She sat in the car outside the emergency room crying before going in. Not because the situation was unique, but because she was alone in it. There was no one to stay calm while she panicked. No one to drive while she thought. No one to tell her what mattered and what could wait. Every decision rested on her shoulders, and her nervous system could not carry it. Bills followed. Childcare costs she had underestimated. Groceries that suddenly felt expensive when one income had to stretch. Rent that kept rising. Each problem alone was manageable. Together, they became suffocating. She started saying she was exhausted all the time. She started saying she did not know how other people did it. She started asking why nobody warned her. But the warning had always been there. It was just drowned out by applause. What stood out to me was how often she said, "I didn't think it would be like this." Not harder in some dramatic sense, just heavier, more constant, more relentless. There was no break between responsibilities, no space to recover, no margin for error. When she was married, she could get sick and rest. Now she got sick and still had to function. When she was overwhelmed before someone else could take over bedtime. Now bedtime happened whether she was breaking or not. When something broke, someone else handled it. Now every broken thing felt personal, like proof she was failing. The freedom she imagined looked nothing like her reality. I remember one night she called me not to ask for advice, but just to talk. She sounded tired in a way the sleep does not fix. She told me she felt like she was constantly behind, that no matter how much she did, it was never enough, that the day never ended, that she missed silence. She said something that stayed with me. She said I didn't realize how much he was holding everything together. That sentence matters. It was not about love. It was not about romance. It was about structure, about the invisible systems that make life tolerable. When those systems disappear, the same tasks multiply in difficulty. Not because the tasks change, but because the person carrying them has no backup. She did not drown in 6 feet of water. She drowned in 6 inches. Repeated daily, grocery shopping with a tired child became overwhelming. Scheduling appointments became exhausting. Making decisions when emotionally depleted felt impossible. She began to freeze instead of act. The stress was no longer about events. It was about anticipation, knowing that something else would go wrong soon and there would be no one to catch it. I noticed another shift. She started framing everything as unfair. Not incorrect, just incomplete. Life is unfair. That is not news. But before, unfairness was something to manage. Now it was something to broadcast. She posted about how hard it was to do everything alone, how strong single mothers have to be, how nobody helps. The irony was hard to miss. Help had existed. She had rejected it because it came with commitment, routine, and expectation. When those same expectations vanished, the burden became overwhelming. This is the part people do not want to talk about because it feels cruel. But it is not cruelty. It is reality. Structure is not oppression. It is load-bearing. Remove it, and the house still stands for a while. Then the roof starts to sag. What broke her was not tragedy. It was accumulation. One responsibility after another with no release valve. She did not lack intelligence. She lacked preparation. She had never been required to regulate her emotions under pressure for long periods. She had never been taught that exhaustion does not excuse inaction. She had never expected adult life to be this monotonous, this repetitive, this demanding. She believed adulthood would feel fulfilling. Instead, it felt like maintenance. The maintenance is what destroys people who are unprepared. There is nothing glamorous about doing the same necessary tasks every day without praise. There is nothing validating about showing up when nobody notices. That is what marriage had quietly required of both partners. That is what independence demanded of her alone. I am not telling this story to mock her. I am telling it because it reveals the core misunderstanding. She thought she was leaving constraint. She was actually leaving reinforcement. She thought she was escaping responsibility. She was actually multiplying it. When she said she felt like she was drowning, I believed her. Not because the water was deep, but because she had never learned how to stand. This is what happens when freedom is chosen without understanding its weight. The collapse looks sudden from the outside, but it is built slowly through a series of choices that remove support while increasing demand. And once the collapse begins, the instinct is not to build strength. It is to look for rescue, to look for validation, to look for someone to blame. That instinct will matter later. The responsibilities that break people are rarely dramatic. They are ordinary. That is why they are so dangerous. When someone else handled them, these tasks barely registered. They happened quietly in the background. Groceries appeared in the fridge. The rent got paid. The car got serviced. Appointments were scheduled. Problems were solved before they became emergencies. None of it felt heroic. None of it felt worthy of attention. It was simply life being managed. Remove that management, and the same tasks become overwhelming. I have noticed that the responsibilities that hit hardest are the ones people assumed were easy. Grocery shopping, for example. It sounds trivial until you are doing it alone with 3 kids, one of them melting down in the aisle, another hungry and impatient, the third asking for things you cannot afford. The noise, the judgment, the time pressure. When someone else was home, handling dinner or bedtime, the stress stayed contained. When everything depends on you, the smallest friction escalates fast. Moving is another one. Switching apartments, packing, lifting furniture, coordinating trucks, dealing with deposits and paperwork. When 2 adults are involved, it is inconvenient. When you are alone, it is exhausting and emotionally destabilizing. There is no one to hold things steady while you figure the rest out. Every delay costs money. Every mistake costs energy you do not have. Then there are the interactions people underestimate the most. Landlords, mechanics, contractors, utility companies. These interactions require confidence, persistence, and emotional control. They do not care if you are overwhelmed. They do not slow down because you are stressed. If you are unsure, they sense it. If you hesitate, you get pushed aside. People who have never had to handle these situations alone are shocked by how dismissive the world can be. Being sick changes everything. When you have support, sickness is inconvenient. When you do not, it becomes a crisis. Running a fever does not excuse you from parenting. Being emotionally depleted does not cancel responsibilities. Children still need food, Work still expects output. Life does not pause because you feel unwell. Without someone to absorb pressure, sickness turns routine tasks into unbearable strain. These are not extraordinary challenges. They are not evidence that the system is broken. They are the baseline demands of adulthood. They happen on Tuesdays. That is the point. Without support, Tuesday becomes impossible. What people fail to understand is that adult life is not hard because of occasional disasters. It is hard because of consistency, because the demands never stop, because there is no finish line where everything suddenly becomes easier. You either develop the capacity to carry that weight, or you slowly collapse under it. The mistake many women make is assuming that independence reduces responsibility. In reality, it concentrates it. Every task that was once shared becomes yours. Every decision that was once discussed becomes solitary. There is no redundancy, no backup system. If you fail, everything fails with you. This is where emotional regulation becomes critical, and this is where the lack of preparation shows most clearly. When pressure increases, emotionally disciplined people narrow their focus. They identify what matters. They solve the next problem. They conserve energy. People without discipline do the opposite. They spiral. They catastrophize. They treat every inconvenience as evidence that they cannot cope. Emotional energy gets wasted on panic instead of problem solving. I have watched women spend hours emotionally reacting to situations that required 10 minutes of practical action. Crying, calling multiple people, posting online, replaying the unfairness of it all. By the time they calm down, they are more exhausted than when the problem began. The task still needs to be done, but now it feels even heavier. This is not because women are incapable. It is because many were never required to build tolerance for discomfort. They were taught to honor their feelings, not regulate them. So when adult life applies steady pressure, the nervous system interprets it as danger instead of demand. Another underestimated responsibility is enforcement. Children do not naturally follow routines. They resist. They test limits. They push boundaries. When two adults enforce structure, resistance is manageable. When one exhausted adult tries to do it alone, it becomes emotionally draining. Saying no requires energy. Holding boundaries requires consistency. When you are depleted, it is easier to give in. Bedtimes slide. Rules soften. Consequences disappear. This creates chaos, which creates more stress, which further drains energy. The environment becomes reactive instead of structured. The parent becomes a referee instead of a leader. None of this happens because the parent does not care. It happens because structure requires strength, and strength requires support or training. People rarely acknowledge how much emotional labor was previously absorbed by someone else. Making decisions, anticipating problems, planning ahead. These are invisible tasks. When they are done well, no one notices. When they are missing, everything feels overwhelming. Without structure, life becomes a series of emergencies. Without planning, every expense is a crisis. Without routine, every day feels chaotic. The nervous system stays activated, never settling. This constant state of alertness is what people describe as burnout, but it is not burnout from overwork. It is burnout from unmanaged life. The dangerous part is that this pressure is interpreted as injustice rather than signal. Instead of asking, "What systems am I missing?" many ask, "Why is this happening to me?" That question leads nowhere. It does not build competence. It does not restore control. It only reinforces helplessness. Adult responsibility is not negotiable. You can delay it. You can outsource parts of it. You can share it. But you cannot escape it. When you try it, returns with interest. The women I see collapsing are not weak. They are unsupported, undisciplined, and emotionally overextended. They were sold a version of independence that ignored its cost. They were told freedom meant fewer obligations. In reality, it meant total ownership. Tuesday does not care about your ideology. The grocery store does not care about your feelings. The landlord does not care about your exhaustion. Life demands competence quietly and consistently. Without structure, those demands feel personal. With structure, they are manageable. This is the dividing line, not between strong and weak, but between those who understand what adulthood requires and those who were never prepared to carry it alone. The word independence is used carelessly. It sounds clean, empowering, controlled, but in practice it means something far less romantic. Independence means there is no one coming to relieve you. When you are running a fever and your head is pounding, independence means you still get out of bed. Lunch still has to be made. Kids still need rides. Emails still need replies. There is no tap out. There is no shift change. Your body can fail, but your responsibilities do not. When you are emotionally wrecked from a bad day, independence means no one takes over bedtime. No one tells you to lie down while they handle the rest. No one absorbs the emotional overflow. You regulate yourself or everything collapses around you. When work drains you, independence means you still cook, still clean, still manage homework, still plan tomorrow. There is no shared exhaustion, only accumulated fatigue. This is the part no one advertises. People talk about independence as if it removes pressure. In reality, it concentrates it. All the weight that was once distributed across two adults settles onto one nervous system. There is no margin, no buffer, no redundancy. If you drop the ball, there is no one else to catch it. This is why independence feels liberating at first and crushing later. The early phase is quiet because systems built by others are still functioning. Routines remain. Bills are paid on time. The illusion holds. But over time, the system erodes. Fatigue accumulates. Small inefficiencies multiply. One missed task leads to another. Stress compounds. Eventually, everything feels heavy. What makes this unbearable for many women is not the workload itself, but the expectation gap. They were taught that independence equals ease, that self-sufficiency feels light, that removing obligations brings peace. When reality delivers the opposite, the cognitive dissonance is severe. They are not prepared for the emotional toll of constant responsibility. Carrying everything alone requires emotional discipline. You cannot afford meltdowns. You cannot afford spirals. You cannot afford to process every feeling in real time. You must act despite discomfort. That skill is learned, not innate, and many were never required to learn it. Instead, they were encouraged to express emotions, not contain them, to validate feelings, not regulate them. That works in low-pressure environments. It fails under sustained demand. I have noticed that the women who struggle most with independence are not the ones doing the most work. They are the ones doing the most emotional reacting. They burn energy on frustration, resentment, and self-pity. They narrate the struggle instead of reducing it. By the time they face the actual task, they are already depleted. Independence does not tolerate that behavior. It punishes it. When there is no one else to pick up the slack, emotional inefficiency becomes catastrophic. A bad mood delays action. A delay creates consequences. Consequences create more stress. The cycle accelerates. This is why many independent women feel like they are always behind. They are not failing because the work is impossible. They are failing because their energy is being spent on the wrong things. There is another truth people avoid. Independence requires planning, ruthless planning, budgets, routines, contingencies. You cannot live reactively when you are alone. Every surprise costs more. Every emergency hits harder. Without structure, independence becomes chaos. Many women mistake independence for spontaneity. They resist routine because it feels restrictive. But routine is what makes independence survivable. Without it, every day becomes improvisation, and improvisation under pressure is exhausting. I have seen women collapse, not because they lacked money, but because they lacked systems. No budget meant every expense felt like a crisis. No meal planning meant daily stress around food. No sleep routine meant constant fatigue. No calendar discipline meant missed appointments and cascading problems. They described their lives as overwhelming. From the outside, the issues were basic. The difference was not circumstance. It was organization. Independence exposes every weakness you have been able to hide. When someone else was there, your lack of planning was compensated for. Your emotional volatility was buffered. Your avoidance was covered. Alone, nothing is hidden. Every flaw becomes expensive. This is the part that triggers resentment. Many women feel betrayed by the promise of independence. They were told it would be empowering. Instead, it feels punishing. Rather than adjusting behavior, they often externalize blame. The economy, society, men, the system, anyone but the choices that remove support without replacing it. There is also a deeper discomfort. Independence forces you to confront your limits. You cannot pretend anymore that someone else will handle what you avoid. If you hate conflict, you still have to deal with landlords and schools. If you hate numbers, you still have to budget. If you hate discipline, you still have to enforce routines. There is no escaping yourself. That realization is unsettling. It is easier to frame independence as oppression than to admit it requires skills you never developed. The women who thrive independently share common traits. They are not louder. They are not more emotional. They are quieter, more disciplined. They plan aggressively. They regulate themselves under pressure. They do not broadcast struggle. They solve problems. They understand that independence is not about feeling good. It is about functioning well. For everyone else, independence becomes a slow grind, not because life is unfair, but because they were sold a fantasy version of self-sufficiency. One without exhaustion, one without sacrifice, one without accountability. That version does not exist. Independence is not freedom. It is responsibility without relief. It is competence or collapse. It is structure or chaos. It demands more from you, not less. Once you understand that everything shifts, until you do, the weight feels personal, cruel, and endless. And many never make that shift. They keep waiting for independence to feel easier, not realizing that it never does. You either become stronger or you drown under the same manageable tasks repeated day after day. I have noticed that many of the women who collapse under independence made the same trade without realizing it. They chose freedom over discipline. Discipline is not exciting. It does not feel expressive. It does not give you a rush. It is repetitive, quiet, and often thankless. Freedom, on the other hand, feels alive. It feels validating. It feels like movement. So when given the choice, many chose what felt good in the moment and postponed what would have made life stable later. This choice shows up most clearly in relationships. I have heard the same story from different men over the years. A woman leaves because she wants independence. She moves out with the kids. She believes she will thrive on her own. For a few months, she does. Then, reality intervenes. Something breaks. The basement floods. The power goes out. A pipe bursts in the middle of the night. She does not know where the shutoff valve is. The kids are crying. She is panicking. One man told me his ex-wife called him after midnight, hysterical. Water was pouring into the basement. She did not know what to do. She could not think. He drove over and fixed it while she sat on the stairs shaking. This was the same woman who had told him she did not need him. The same woman who said she was happier without the structure he provided. That moment matters because it exposes the difference between freedom and competence. Freedom feels good when nothing is wrong. Discipline is what keeps things from going wrong in the first place. When discipline is absent, problems arrive unfiltered and overwhelming. Many single mothers struggle not because they lack strength, but because they chose excitement over stability earlier in life. They picked men who were fun instead of men who were reliable. They wanted intensity, not consistency. They wanted to feel desired, not supported. They wanted the Instagram version of life, not the unglamorous reality. When those men predictably failed to commit, failed to provide, failed to stay, the women were left holding everything alone. Children from men who will not help, will not answer the phone, will not show up when things go wrong. At that point, freedom stops feeling empowering. It feels isolating. What often follows is blame. The ex is useless. The system is unfair. Men are trash. Society does not support mothers enough. Some of these complaints contain truth, but they avoid the central issue. Choices were made. Patterns were repeated. Stability was available and rejected because it felt boring, restrictive, or insufficiently exciting. Discipline would have required delaying gratification. Choosing the man who came home on time instead of the one who sent late-night texts. Choosing routine over novelty. Choosing long-term predictability over short-term emotion. Many did not want that. And now they are living with the consequences. I have noticed another pattern in these households. Chaos becomes normal. Without discipline, daily life loses its structure. Bedtimes drift, meals become inconsistent, rules change based on mood. Consequences disappear because enforcing them takes energy the parent no longer has. The home becomes reactive. Everything is negotiated. Nothing is enforced. This environment is exhausting for everyone. Children need boundaries to feel safe. Without them, they push harder, test more, and demand more attention. The mother, already overwhelmed, gives in to avoid conflict. This short-term relief creates long-term instability. The children become harder to manage, not easier. What is often missing in these situations is not love. It is leadership. Leadership is uncomfortable. It requires saying no when you are tired. It requires consistency when you want rest. It requires being disliked in the short term to create stability in the long term. Discipline demands energy up front, so the chaos does not drain you later. Many women confuse discipline with control or oppression. They resist it because they associate it with restriction. But discipline is what allows life to function. Without it, every day becomes an emergency. This is why many single mothers feel like they are constantly putting out fires. They are not bad mothers. They are operating without a framework. Without structure, even simple days feel overwhelming. There is also a cultural reinforcement at play. Women who choose discipline rarely get praised. Women who choose freedom and then struggle get sympathy. Public breakdowns are rewarded with attention. Quiet competence is ignored. so the behavior gets reinforced. Express distress, receive validation, avoid accountability. Repeat. Over time, this creates a feedback loop. The more overwhelmed she feels, the more she externalizes responsibility. The less responsibility she takes, the more overwhelmed she becomes. Discipline would break this cycle. But discipline requires accepting discomfort without applause. That is a hard sell in a culture that celebrates feelings over outcomes. What makes this especially tragic is that many of these women are capable. They are intelligent. They are strong. But strength without direction is wasted. Intelligence without discipline produces chaos. Capability without structure collapses under sustained pressure. Freedom without discipline is not liberation. It is exposure. When there is no routine, every decision drains energy. When there is no plan, every expense becomes a crisis. When there is no enforcement, every child tests harder. When there is no structure, life feels like it is constantly slipping out of control. Discipline is what turns effort into stability. The women who thrive after divorce or independence are not the ones who feel the most. They are the ones who organize the most. They impose structure on themselves. They create routines. They budget strictly. They enforce rules even when it is uncomfortable. They accept that adult life is repetitive and demanding. They do not expect freedom to feel easy. They expect it to require effort. Most women who collapse never make this adjustment. They keep chasing relief instead of control. They keep choosing emotional comfort over long-term stability. They keep telling themselves that things should be easier instead of becoming stronger. The result is predictable. Life does not get easier. The responsibilities keep coming. The exhaustion deepens. The resentment grows. Freedom without discipline does not lead to peace. It leads to constant strain. And the longer this pattern continues, the harder it becomes to reverse. Because discipline requires admitting that earlier choices were flawed. That is a painful realization. It is easier to blame the world than to rebuild yourself. But without discipline, independence remains a burden, not a gift. There is another layer that makes everything worse, and it's rarely acknowledged honestly. Modern struggle has become a performance. I see it constantly. A problem appears, and instead of being handled, it is documented. Rent is due, and money is tight. Out comes the camera. A child is acting out. The phone comes up. A bad day turns into a public confession. Tears become content. Stress becomes a post. Overwhelm becomes an identity. This is not accidental. It is learned behavior. Public emotional display is rewarded. Sympathy flows in. Comments reassure. Strangers validate feelings. Sometimes money appears. Sometimes attention does. The message is clear. Express distress publicly, and you will be supported. Handle your life quietly, and you will be ignored. Over time, this rewires behavior. Instead of asking, "What do I need to do next?" the question becomes, "How do I express how bad this feels?" Emotional output replaces problem solving. The feeling becomes the focus, not the fix. The more dramatic the display, the more reinforcement it receives. This does not solve anything. It delays everything. I watched a video recently of a woman sobbing because she had to put her kids in daycare so she could work, but daycare cost nearly what she earned. It is a real problem, a painful one. But what struck me was not the issue itself. It was the framing. Life was happening to her. She was powerless. She was a victim of circumstance. I have seen the same situation handled very differently by single fathers. They worked nights. They coordinate family help. They rearrange schedules. They do not broadcast. They do not narrate. They act. There are no crying videos, no public meltdowns, just solutions imperfect and exhausting but real. The difference is not empathy. The difference is expectation. Men are raised knowing no one is coming to save them. Women are increasingly raised believing their struggles should be witnessed, validated, and accommodated. When real life refuses to play along, the shock is severe. The performance culture teaches that emotional expression equals progress. It does not. It consumes energy that should be spent on action. It keeps the nervous system activated and unfocused. It trains people to seek relief through validation instead of resolution. There's also a darker consequence. When struggle becomes content, it becomes strategic. Not always consciously, but functionally. Public breakdowns become a way to offload responsibility. Someone else might step in. Someone else might help. Someone else might fix it. But life does not reward this long term. It punishes it. I have seen women who cry online daily about being overwhelmed while making no structural changes to their lives. No budget, no routine, no boundaries. The problems repeat, and so does the performance. The cycle continues because the incentives are aligned that way. What rarely gets attention is the quiet woman handling her life without spectacle. The one who reorganizes instead of dramatizes. The one who feels stress but contains it long enough to act. She receives no applause, no validation, no rescue. So her behavior is not reinforced publicly. Over time, this creates a culture where dysfunction is visible and competence is invisible. This has consequences in households. Children learn what is modeled. When stress appears and the response is panic tears and externalization, children absorb that pattern. They learn that pressure equals crisis, that problems are unbearable, that responsibility is overwhelming. They learn to react emotionally instead of acting deliberately. In homes without a second adult to counterbalance this, the pattern intensifies. I have spoken to teachers who describe it clearly. Children from these homes arrive tired, unfocused, unprepared. Not because their mothers do not care, but because chaos has replaced structure. Bedtimes are inconsistent. Mornings are rushed. Supplies are forgotten. Homework is incomplete. Everything is reactive. The teacher sees the outcome, not the cause. And when the cause is named, it is labeled shaming. It is not shaming to say structure matters. It is reality. Another problem with emotional display culture is that it blurs the line between genuine hardship and self-created crisis. When every inconvenience is framed as trauma, nothing is prioritized. A flat tire becomes a breakdown. A long wait becomes injustice. Normal friction is treated as suffering. I once watched a woman have a complete meltdown at a tire shop because they could not fix her flat immediately. She cried. She called multiple people. She posted about how unfair it was. The wait was 2 hours. The situation was inconvenient, not catastrophic. But the emotional response consumed far more energy than the problem required. A man in the same situation sat down, got coffee-handled emails, and waited. Not because he was happier, because he expected inconvenience and did not interpret it as an attack. The emotional energy wasted on reaction could have been used to solve 3 other problems. Instead, it left her drained and behind. This difference compounds over time. People who conserve emotional energy build capacity. People who spend it freely collapse faster. When independence demands constant output, emotional inefficiency becomes unsustainable. There is also the issue of oversensitivity. Many women have been taught that their feelings should never be challenged, that discomfort equals harm, that criticism equals abuse. This makes growth impossible. When feedback arrives, instead of being evaluated, it is internalized as an attack. Tears follow. Defensiveness rises. The lesson is missed. The behavior does not change. I had a female employee once who cried every time I gave her constructive feedback. Not insults, not hostility. Simple job coaching. More detail needed here. This deadline matters. This needs revision. Each time she left the room in tears. Eventually, I stopped giving feedback. Her performance stagnated. She was eventually let go. In her mind, she was mistreated. In reality, she was protected from the discomfort that would have helped her improve. Emotional fragility feels compassionate in theory. In practice, it is disabling. When real life demands adaptation, fragile systems break. People who cannot tolerate feedback cannot develop competence. People who cannot regulate emotion under pressure cannot handle responsibility. Independence exposes this brutally. Social media amplifies everything. People compare their hardest days to other people's highlight reels. They see curated ease and assume something is wrong with them. They do not realize that everyone struggles. Some people just do not broadcast it. This comparison fuels resentment. Why is life so hard for me? Why does everyone else seem fine? The answer is not that others have easier lives. It is that others are quieter about difficulty and more focused on management. The performance culture rewards collapse and ignores resilience. So collapse spreads. The tragedy is that emotional expression feels like honesty, but without action, it becomes self-sabotage. Feelings are real. They matter. But they are not instructions. They are signals. Ignoring the signal to perform the emotion leads nowhere. Life does not respond to tears. It responds to structure, discipline, and action. Until that lesson is learned, independence remains unbearable. Not because the work is impossible, but because the emotional habits built in a low-responsibility culture cannot survive high-responsibility reality. When structure disappears from a household, children are the first to feel it, and the last to be protected from its consequences. I want to be clear about something. Most of the mothers I am describing love their children deeply. This is not about neglect in the moral sense. It is about overload. When one adult is responsible for everything, something always gives. And what usually gives is consistency. Structure is not about control, it is about predictability. Children need to know what happens next, when they wake up, when they eat, when they sleep, what the rules are, what the consequences will be. This predictability calms their nervous systems. It makes the world feel safe and manageable. When that structure weakens, anxiety rises. In households where the father is gone or uninvolved, the entire dynamic shifts. Not because mothers are incapable, but because the role distribution collapses. The mother becomes everything at once. Provider, caregiver, disciplinarian, emotional anchor, friend, enforcer. There is no rotation, no relief. Under that pressure, priorities shift. Discipline becomes negotiable because enforcing it costs energy. Saying no leads to conflict, and conflict feels unbearable when you are already exhausted. So rules soften. Bedtimes slide, screens become babysitters. Consequences are inconsistent. Not because the mother does not know better, but because she's choosing survival over structure. The children respond predictably. They push boundaries harder. They act out more. They resist routines. They demand attention in louder ways. This increases the mother's stress, which further reduces her capacity to enforce structure. The cycle feeds itself. What starts as compassion becomes chaos. I have spoken with teachers who see this pattern daily. They describe children arriving at school tired, hungry, emotionally dysregulated. Homework unfinished, supplies missing. Not because the mother does not care, but because mornings are frantic and nights are unstructured. Everything is reactive. The teachers notice something else. These children often become anxious or hyper-vigilant. They sense instability. They feel responsible for managing their environment. Some become parentified, stepping into adult roles far too early. I see this in my work as well. An 8-year-old who worries about his mother's mood. A 10-year-old who helps raise younger siblings because mom is overwhelmed. A teenager who is more emotionally regulated than the adult in the home. These children are robbed of childhood not through cruelty, but through absence of structure. They learn that adulthood is fragile, that pressure leads to collapse, that emotions dictate reality. This shapes their development in quiet, damaging ways. Little boys grow up without male guidance. They lack models for calm authority, for emotional containment, for disciplined response to stress. They internalize confusion about their role and value. Little girls watch their mothers struggle and learn that womanhood means exhaustion, overwhelm, and public breakdown. They absorb the idea that life is too much to handle, that accountability is optional, that feelings justify dysfunction. This is not a personal failure. It is a systemic one. When the father is present, structure is often reinforced naturally, not through force, but through presence, through consistency, through being the bad guy when necessary, through holding boundaries without emotional collapse. Remove that presence, and the emotional load shifts entirely onto the mother. Even strong women feel this loss. I have watched capable women maintain immaculate homes, disciplined routines, and emotionally stable children while married. After divorce, the same women struggle to keep basic order. Not because they became weaker, but because they lost the framework that made everything else possible. It is like removing a load-bearing wall and being surprised when the roof starts to sag. This is where the conversation becomes uncomfortable. Pointing this out is often labeled as shaming single mothers. It is not. It is acknowledging reality. Structure matters. Children need it. Love alone is not enough. The absence of structure does not just affect behavior. It affects academic performance, emotional regulation, social development. Teachers see it. Counselors see it. The data supports it. But discussing it openly is discouraged because it challenges comforting narratives. Children raised in chaotic environments struggle more, not because their mothers are bad, but because chaos is corrosive. Another consequence is the revolving door of male figures. Without commitment, relationships come and go. Children form attachments that dissolve. Trust erodes. Stability becomes temporary. This instability leaves lasting marks on their sense of security. The mother often justifies this by saying she deserves happiness. That may be true, but children pay the cost of that pursuit when stability is sacrificed for adult fulfillment. I am not arguing that people should stay in abusive or destructive relationships. That is a separate conversation. What I am describing is the widespread abandonment of functional families for emotional reasons without regard for the structural consequences. Children cannot process adult rationalizations. They experience outcomes. Inconsistency, unpredictability, emotional volatility, financial strain. These shape their worldview more than any explanation ever will. The hardest part is that many mothers recognize this but feel trapped. They know structure is missing. They know chaos is growing, But rebuilding discipline alone feels impossible when energy is already depleted. This is where accountability matters. Not blame, accountability. Acknowledging that choices have ripple effects, that freedom has a cost, that children require more than love. They require order. The women who manage to stabilize these households do so by embracing discipline ruthlessly. They impose routines even when it hurts. They reduce chaos deliberately. They limit emotional expression in front of their children. They create predictability as a gift, not a punishment. It is hard. It is unglamorous. It is lonely. But it works. Most do not make this shift. They continue operating in survival mode. The children adapt, but at a cost. Anxiety, behavioral issues, emotional burden, a distorted sense of responsibility. This is the real damage, not the mother's suffering, but the generational consequences of unmanaged adulthood. Children deserve better than chaos framed as empowerment. They deserve stability, consistency, and adults who can handle pressure without collapsing. Without structure, love becomes heavy instead of safe. And when structure collapses, children carry the weight whether they are ready or not. There is a contradiction at the center of all this that rarely gets addressed honestly. Many of these women want male-level commitment without offering reciprocal commitment in return. They want stability, protection provision, and problem solving. They want someone to fix the car deal with emergencies, carry the heavy things, handle the pressure when life gets chaotic. But they do not want obligation placed on them. They do not want loyalty expected. They do not want routine enforced. They do not want to be accountable to anyone else's standards. In other words, they want the benefits of partnership without the cost of partnership. This expectation creates endless frustration because it is detached from reality. No competent man signs up for asymmetry once he recognizes it. Men are not blind to the deal being offered. They see when they are being asked to provide labor structure and stability without respect, authority, or reciprocity. This is why so many women are confused when men disengage. They ask why men will not commit, why men avoid responsibility, why men refuse to step up. What they often fail to ask is what men are being asked to step into. A role with obligation, but no authority. Investment without security. Responsibility without appreciation. That is not partnership. That is extraction. I know a woman who regularly calls her ex-husband for help. He fixes the sink. He mows the lawn. He picks up the kids when she is overwhelmed. He shows up when things go wrong. But when he suggested reconciliation, her response was immediate. She needed her independence. She wanted freedom. She was not ready to commit. She wanted husband-level support while dating other men. She did not see the contradiction. From her perspective, she was simply asking for help. From his perspective, he was being used. Over time, resentment grew. He began saying no. She felt abandoned again. This pattern is common. The expectation that men should provide without expectation is reinforced culturally. Men are told to man up, to handle it, to be strong, to show up without complaint. Women are told their feelings matter, that they deserve support, that their struggles should be accommodated. The result is a massive imbalance in how responsibility is framed. When women struggle, they receive sympathy. When men struggle, they receive silence or ridicule. A woman posts about being overwhelmed and receives thousands of supportive comments, offers of help, and validation. A man posts the same thing and is told to get it together. This double standard shapes behavior. Female struggle becomes a currency. Male struggle becomes shame. In such a culture, it is not surprising that men withdraw. They learn that their pain is irrelevant and their role is utilitarian. They are expected to provide stability without being allowed to require it. Over time, many decide the cost is not worth it. This withdrawal has consequences. Competent women suffer from it as well. Women who are disciplined, accountable, and capable are increasingly mistrusted. Men approach them cautiously, waiting for the breakdown, the drama, the entitlement to emerge. The reputation created by dysfunctional behavior poisons the pool for everyone. I know women who handle their lives quietly. They manage finances. They enforce boundaries. They do not broadcast struggle. They take responsibility for their choices. And they cannot find partners. Men are wary, burned too many times, conditioned to expect collapse eventually. The capable women pay for the behavior of the incapable ones. Another issue that deepens the collapse is emotional oversensitivity. Many women have been taught that any discomfort is harmful, that criticism is abusive, that boundaries are oppression. This makes growth nearly impossible. Life requires correction. Feedback is essential. If you cannot hear what needs improvement without interpreting it as an attack, you cannot develop competence. You stagnate. I have seen this dynamic play out in workplaces repeatedly. Women who cannot tolerate basic feedback fall apart under pressure. Instead of adjusting behavior, they internalize victimhood. Performance suffers. Accountability disappears. Eventually, they are removed, and the narrative becomes one of injustice rather than consequence. This inability to separate feedback from personal worth cripples independence. When you are alone, there is no one to soften reality for you. Mistakes cost money. Delays cost time. Poor decisions have immediate effects. If every correction feels like violence, the world becomes unbearable. This is compounded by unrealistic expectations about adulthood. Many women genuinely believe adult life should feel fulfilling, exciting, and emotionally rewarding most of the time. When it does not, they assume something is wrong. They do not realize that adulthood is largely maintenance. Repetition, responsibility, sacrifice. The reward is stability, not constant happiness. Social media makes this worse. Highlight reels create the illusion that everyone else has figured it out, that life should be easy, that struggle is abnormal. So when reality feels heavy, they assume failure instead of normalcy. This belief sets them up for collapse. They are waiting for life to feel easier instead of becoming stronger. They expect circumstances to change instead of adjusting themselves. They look for rescue instead of developing capacity. The result is predictable. Panic when pressure arrives, blame when things go wrong, withdrawal when accountability is required. What makes this especially damaging is how it affects children. They watch adults who cannot handle criticism, who avoid responsibility, who externalize blame. They learn that discomfort is intolerable and that growth is optional. This creates a generation unprepared for reality. There is a pattern to the collapse that is almost mechanical. First comes the freedom phase. I don't need anyone. Then the reality phase. This is harder than I thought. Then the panic phase. I can't do this alone. Then the victim phase. Why won't anyone help me? Finally, the blame phase. This is everyone else's fault. Very few exit this cycle. To do so requires admitting uncomfortable truths. That choices mattered. That discipline was avoided. That accountability was deferred. That independence was misunderstood. Most do not want to make that admission. The identity built around struggle is too valuable. The sympathy is too comforting. The responsibility is too heavy. So the cycle continues. The women who break out of it do something different. They stop asking for rescue. They stop narrating hardship. They stop blaming others. They accept that life is hard and act accordingly. They build systems. They regulate emotions. They take responsibility without applause. Their lives improve not because circumstances change, but because they do. Most will never make this shift. They are too invested in the narrative that life is unfair to them personally, that they are uniquely burdened, that accountability is cruelty. Reality does not care. Bills still arrive. Children still need guidance. Work still expects performance. Life does not negotiate with feelings. This is the truth at the core of the collapse. It is not that modern women cannot handle life. It is that many refuse to accept what handling life actually requires. There is one lesson beneath everything you just heard, and it is not cruel. It is clarifying. Life does not become easier because you want it to. It becomes manageable only when you become stronger than the pressure it applies. That strength is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is built quietly through discipline, responsibility, and the willingness to face discomfort without outsourcing it to someone else. Real stability is not the absence of struggle. It is the ability to function while struggling, to keep showing up when you are tired, to make clear decisions when emotions are loud, to accept that adulthood is not about constant fulfillment, but about carrying weight without collapsing under it. Independence is not a slogan. It is a skill. And like any skill, it must be trained. Those who avoid that training spend their lives waiting for relief that never comes. Those who accept it build lives that slowly, steadily improve, not because life stops being hard, but because they stop being fragile. This lesson applies to everyone, men and women, parents and non-parents. Anyone who believes the world owes them ease will be disappointed. Anyone who decides to meet reality as it is will eventually gain control over it. If this perspective challenged you, I want to hear from you. What moment in your life forced you to grow stronger instead of waiting for rescue? What truth did reality teach you that no one warned you about? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thoughtful conversations matter here. And if you value honest discussions about life, responsibility, and strength, consider subscribing to the channel. Not for motivation, not for comfort, but for clarity.